Next up in my weapon videos is going to be Robb. Robb's weapon serves a very important purpose currently in the game, since he is the only means of obtaining a cavalry weapon without spending black diamonds directly. So even if you don't use his weapon on Robb himself, then of course you can use this as a source for cavalry base attack, which for cavalry players is obviously very, very important. That won't overly be the focus of this video though. It's going to be seeing if Robb himself can ever realistically be made competitive for low to mid spenders realistically. So once again, I have in a spreadsheet all the details you could possibly want about him. Now I'm recording this at the same time I've recorded my Garel video, which should have gone out just before this. And in that video, I realized, which I didn't realize before, that Garel does not proc from weakness attacks. So when weakness attacks are triggered, they don't actually count as a spearman strike, and his defense debuff doesn't actually apply because of that. Robb does, however, proc from weakness attacks, which is a bit weird because the tooltip is near enough the exact same. Another potential misconception about Robb is this cav attack plus a percentage isn't overall, it's actually specific to that lineup. So you see here, C3 lineup, blah, blah, blah. This attack triggers Robb Stark's War Awakening skill, Wolf's Assault, ally C3 lineup, attack plus 4%. And that is the same just down below in the same second, triggers Wolf's Assault, ally C2 lineup, attack 4%. So you don't actually stack to this cap really quickly, which some players might believe, since you have to stack this up individually for every single lineup. This means that the cap that gets added with his weapon, which isn't there in the normal 4-star, isn't as big an issue as you may originally suspect. I have the stacking time here going up to 28 attacks. Attacks is in the form of all 5 lineups getting 1 attack off. The reason it's 28 is because rebel group attacks for me with previous testing go up to 140 normal attacks with melee units. So 140 across 5 lineups is 28 groups of 5. You will actually hit Robb's cap, but it will, however, be very late in the fight, so you can still get good value from stacking this additional attack as much as possible. If you want to assign a attack value to this ability, you probably want to look at around this number here in terms of balancing out the uptime. So Robb with a 4-star weapon is actually starting to approach something like Lena in terms of raw cavalry stats. He's not quite there. He'll give, I believe, 66% cavalry health and defense and then 18% cavalry attack plus this value here. The issue with him, of course, is that he just doesn't really have synergy attached to him, to anything that's realistically that good of cavalry at least. You'll tend to want to be running female with cavalry, and he's of course male, so that's an issue. For cav weakness builds though, if you have his weapon high starred, honestly isn't that bad, surprisingly enough. A 4-star weapon is pretty much unobtainable at this point, however, so this is something that's more of a forecast into the future. The thing he has the best synergy with is bleed, since you'll be able to stack his attack buff so much faster, and therefore get value out of the higher stacks earlier in the fight, towards the end of the fight, of course. So if you're running mono cav with a bleed setup, Robb, honestly, as that like 5th commander, if you have good stars in his weapon, you could do worse, to be honest. Never going to be hugely ideal, but unless you have like a really high starred weapon on, say, a Julian, and you want a 5th commander for that slot, and you have a 4-star Robb weapon on Robb, he's probably preferable in that scenario to something like Julian. It's a very niche situation, but it may well be relevant to some people out there. And accounting for uptime with bleed and 4-star weapon, it's probably in the region of like 100% cav attack plus his base 18%. So the stats you're actually getting from that is fairly decent. Plus, this will be even better if you get stars on Sonara's weapon as well. This is just Sonara's base effect, which is a 1.96 multiplier with the revised formula that I also released fairly recently. So Robb, if you have 3 4-star weapon on him, honestly not a bad pick for Cav bleed, for Cav weakness in those 5th commander slots. You could definitely do worse than him. In those builds, it would be preferable to something like Julian, I'd say, unless you start having his weapon at 3 4-stars as well. So for low to mid spenders, this could be something you look to incorporate into your builds a bit longer term. Realistically, the best mid spender builds will of course not use Robb. You just want to throw his weapon on something else and just abuse it for base attack. But the option is there, and he does actually become a fairly decent stat funneler, and realistically isn't as much of a joke as his reputation as a commander would probably lead you to believe.